Hey, welcome to the Pharmacy Residency and Money podcast, a member of the Pharmacy Podcast Network. I'm Tony Guerra, pharmacist and publisher, bringing you help succeeding in your career, health, and wealth before, during, and after residency. You can sign up for the email list at pharmacyresidencypodcast.com to get your free LOI template or get editing help working one-on-one with me at residency.teachable.com. Hey, welcome to the Pharmacy Residency Podcast, a member of the Pharmacy Podcast Network. Today I have Joe Baker, who is the author of Baker's Dirty Dozen Principles for Financial Independence. You may have heard him on Your Financial Pharmacist, but I wanted to ask him how he could help residents and other pharmacists that are graduating. He's earned his MBA and spoke at APHA, and I think he's going to be a great addition to the show. So, Joe, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Tony.
All right. Well, let's get a little bit of background. If I remember right, there was another relatively famous book about financial independence and the simple path to wealth, where a father was trying to help his daughter do well financially. Can you tell me a little bit about the book and how you got so into financial independence?
It's really an interesting story, but to tell that story, I'll tell you a little more of a minor story. I've taught at the University of Arkansas College of Pharmacy for 24 years. And about 20 years into it, I tell a lot of stories in class, and the students come back from years later and they don't relate necessarily some money formula that I had taught in class, but they'll relate a story I told. And not to compare myself to Jesus, but, Jesus did that. He told a lot of stories. And that's what sticks with people. So several students and former students said, you really need to write a book. So this was the precursor right before COVID. And I said, this might be a good time to do this. So I wrote the book. It wasn't published yet, did it all on my own. I thought I was really proud of myself. And my daughters, who are very cautious about me, know that I can sometimes say things that are inappropriate or tell a story that's a little off color. And since my book was filled with stories, my oldest daughter, Lindsay, said, "Dad, I'm coming home for a Christmas vacation, and I want to read your manuscript before you publish it." And I said, "That's okay," because I don't always get the grammar right, and she's excellent in the writing and grammar and all that. So she during Christmas break, she sat down and she would read part of the book, and then she'd just fall on the floor laughing about some of the stories. And she said, "Dad, that's a great story, but you cannot tell that story." And I said, "Oh, okay." So she would either modify a story or delete a story. And then when we got into the heart of the book on the financial matters, she said, "Dad, I don't understand this section on opportunity cost or stocks or something like that." And I said, "What do you mean you don't understand? This book is designed for your age group." She says, "Well, I'm sorry, I just don't understand it." So we would go and we literally did paragraph by paragraph of the manuscript. She would read it and she said, "I don't understand that." So I would explain it to her or do my best. Then she would rewrite it and tell it back to me, and I'd say, "Yes, that's right." And we did that throughout the book. And she did such a great job, and it just flows so much better, and wrote so much that I had to put her down as a co-author. And a little side note on that. One day, I can't tell you how many times I read through the manuscript, and I was sitting at the kitchen table, and I am getting up in the years, and I said out loud, I said, "This is really, really good here, but I don't remember writing this." And my daughter, hearing that, piped up and said, "Well, you didn't, I did." And I knew at that point I had to name her as co-author. And the book is filled with stories, and she made sure they were all appropriate. And they're all true stories. I have over 33 contributors to the book telling me their stories and relating in the book, because that's how we can really apply financial matters into our life is to hear other people's stories, and if we can learn from others' mistakes or some good tips, and then that's what I tried to do in the book.
All right. Well, let's go through 13, but kind of we make a little bit of a twist here. So
Okay.
how did you and how did your daughters find the path that will fulfill them? Because that's where you started out. And for us as pharmacists, we started, in pharmacy, but that doesn't necessarily fulfill you. It might.
Right.
But how do you kind of offset these tuitions that students are paying these days compared to what I paid was I had $900 a year for tuition for undergrad, and then $4,000 a year for grad. So,
Right.
yeah, how do you do it?
Well, I'm going to end up telling another story, but
you know what? It stories drive audience. So
I just heard a couple months ago some guy, and I wish I could remember his name and what he had said, but he said, sometimes we give the young folks some guidance that is not exactly right by telling them follow their passion. What we should do is have them find out what they're really good at, and then go down that avenue. Then they'll find their passion in what they're doing. And that is so true. I wanted to major in history because that's my passion. So I minored in history and went down the path of business. And now I'm able to travel and do a lot more in the history area. And my daughter, the co-author, Lindsay, when she went off to college, she said, I said, Lindsay, what are you going to major in? And she said, well, I'm thinking about majoring, or I'm not thinking about it. I'm going to major in Christian studies. And I said, oh boy. I said, that's great for eternity, but what about the here and now? And that's a typical dad, and I know that's short-sighted. But she got a great education, and then to make herself marketable, she went out and got her master. She taught in Istanbul, Turkey, and the West Bank of Palestine in Israel, and really found her love in teaching. So to make herself what we call certifiable, she decided to get her master's in education, and she did. And now she teaches both English and history on the middle school level and enjoys it. So that was a kind of a circuitous route to where she is today. But she found her passion. She found out what she was good at. And so everything needs to be held with a grain of salt on your avenue that you're taking. And education is so expensive. And I say you can follow your passion as long as you're not taking out huge student loans to do it. Because and I'm not even going to go into the certain majors out there, degrees, that's kind of ridiculous to borrow $150,000 when you get out and the most you can make is 35, 40, 45,000. I'm sorry, that's just not economically feasible. And that comes from a dad talking there. But the nice thing about pharmacy, and as you well know, the education does pay off. It is just, and I tell my students, I said, never in the history of our country that I know of that have a group of young people your age have made this much money at this early in their career. So hats off to the pharmacy students, and you can find your passion. There are just so many avenues of pharmacy, retail, hospital, clinical, teaching and education. They're just about any area that you think that you can find your passion and that you're good at, you can do that with pharmacy. That's why it's such a great benefit.
All right. Well, you actually answered the first three. You got the path that will fulfill you. In your book, you talk about the vision goals and that, you guys have the same goals. So maybe, how did your how did you and your spouse kind of differ, or were you the same? When she said, "This is my major," you had your opinion. And then how did you and your spouse come together as, okay, we'll keep paying for that? Or was it like whatever she wants to do? Or because I'm assuming that maybe you were paying part of the tuition or not.
Well, it wasn't part. We paid it all.
Oh.
I know. And maybe if I'd had sons, I'd have made them go out and work. But we've always, whether it's right or not, I don't know. We said, your education is your job. And as long as you're making good grades, we're not going to require you to have a job. And fortunately, both my kids, even though they went to private undergraduate, and one of them went to Vanderbilt as a master's, and now at UCLA getting her PhD, not $1 in student loans. So, and I've told people, I say, if you're not borrowing any money for student loans for your education, it gives you more leeway in following your passion. So at that point, I said, my wife and I said, hey, it's not, we're not borrowing any money for this particular degree. So let's just see how it falls out. And it did work out, but I'm ashamed to say that I was not a big fan of the degree at the time, but as it turned out, it worked out.
Well, you got a history degree, I got an English degree, and so it all does work out. And you talk about education as an appreciable item, but it sounds like you can go overboard where now your ROI is limited.
It is.
Well, let's talk about the time value of money then, because what really happens when you get those student loans is that you're in that kind of quandary of, should I invest? Should I buy a house? All of these things. So first, could you explain time value of money in the way you did, that you moved from the way you had explained it first to the way that you had explained it after your daughter's edits? And then talk a little bit about how students today that are maybe not making a lot of money in residency can at least gain an appreciation for the time value of money.
Well, and the definition I use for time value of money is not the Investopedia definition. I look at it as more as opportunity cost, because I'll use the example of residency. Is it going to be financially feasible for me to get paid, 50% in residency of getting out 40 or 50%?
It's about a third or half, somewhere around there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, and you look at that and say, well, I know there's an economic factor here, but there's also a factor that I need a residency because there's just some areas I want to go into that you've got to have a residency. And you can answer that better than I can. I think in education and some clinical areas that you have to have that. So I know that opportunity cost, which all that is if you make a decision today, an economic decision, if you'd have made a different decision, how much would that cost you down the road? But there are other factors in that. And so when I look at the time value of money, I always think about opportunity cost.
Okay.
Every
what could have been. Okay. So let's talk about getting that actual money or keeping it. So let's talk about saver versus spender. I feel like we're kind of born one way or the other. My wife is the saver, I'm the spender to some extent. But we are both out of credit card debt, all consumer debt. We pay cash for our cars and all that stuff now. But those kind of go hand in hand. I think we just crossed the 1 trillion mark in credit card debt in our country. Tell me a little bit about ways that maybe those that are not necessarily natural savers have been able to save and succeed, and how do they stay out of credit card debt?
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with just educating yourself and knowing which way to go. One of the things that I'm really proud of my daughters, and if everyone could at least have this idea that no matter what your credit card balance is each month, you pay it off. And they have never, they've always paid off their credit card balance each month. And I know Dave Ramsey says you shouldn't even have credit cards and all that.
Right.
But I just don't think that's feasible this day and time. Can't rent a vehicle without one, etc. And so they're very good at that. And I think it's just part of educating ourselves, and whether it's going through a Dave Ramsey Peace University class to have that awareness, or just sitting down and just analyzing what the cost. Yeah, some of these credit cards are 25% finance charges on there. That's
it's crazy.
Certain parts
it's crazy.
of Chicago, if you miss a payment like that, you'll get your knees.
I'm sorry if you can get the 25%. Yeah,
that's right. That's right. So, but that's the key. I don't even know who to attribute this to, but I've always said, I've heard it someplace and I'm borrowing it, but it's not how much you make, it's how much you keep.
Right.
And boy, you're talking about credit card. If you can pay off your balance each month and get to the point where you can pay cash for your vehicle, because you talk about the biggest obstacle to wealth accumulation, and we're talking about vehicles. It's crazy how much that the vehicles cost over time. And at least if you can pay cash, and we have, gosh, I guess we've been married. I better figure that out pretty quick because we got an anniversary coming up. So 35 plus, 37 plus years, we haven't had our car note. And don't be fooled even if it's 0% financing, there's a cost there. There's a hidden cost. So,
okay.
So anyway,
well, let's ask about that. So you sent them and took care of the tuition. Did you send them to college with cars that you paid for when they were teenagers, or how did you handle that?
No, as a matter of fact, that I told them, I said, listen, they wanted to go to a private school, of course, and it was going to cost a whole lot more. And I said, here's the deal. You can go to the private undergraduate school, but you're not going to have a vehicle. And there's an interesting story on that. One of my daughter's good friends from college, they were roommates, and she told us years later, 10 or 12 years later, and she said, we always thought Lindsay and Brooke, that's my other daughter, came from a very poor family and meager means because they didn't have a vehicle on campus. And this was an undergraduate school that, it was nice vehicles in the parking lot. And so they just considered them being poor, and they were pretty frugal with their money and all that. So that was the deal we made, that they wouldn't have a vehicle at least their first 2 years of college. And then when they did, there was a tornado in Arkansas. Surprise, surprise. And it hit a car lot. And I was shopping for a vehicle, and I said, what about these vehicles over here that were hit by the tornado? I said, oh, well, I found one. It was a Jeep Liberty, had all four tires blown out. The chain link fence went across the hood. It looked like it'd been in some kind of demolition. And I said, and the windows were all broken. I said, how much is this one? And they looked at me like, you're an idiot. Oh, no, I have teenage daughters that are in college, and I don't want to have to worry about any dings or scrapes. And they made me a deal. So that was the vehicle they had. So even when they were towards the end of college, they had an old beat up clunker, if you will. But because of all that, and we had to explain to them about why we're doing what we're doing, and they have a better appreciation, and they're in their 30s now, and I'm very proud where they are financially. Both were liberal arts majors, and one's even getting her PhD. And here's another one as a dad head scratcher. She's getting a PhD in Near Eastern languages and cultures. So here you go. So,
but they're paying her to do it. So,
yes,
but there is that opportunity cost. But yeah,
they are, and but she is fluent in Arabic, Spanish, French, and Syriac. So if there's ever a big demand for Syriac language people, we're in good shape.
Okay, well let's go on to what happens after college, and once you get that job, and I made this mistake myself on thinking that the match was all I should do. But tell me a little bit about what you feel with savings rates and what's reasonable. I've heard 10, 25, 50 from Mr. Money Mustache type of thing. But what do you think about employer sponsored plans? And then about what really should you at a minimum be saving and putting away?
Good point. Uh, uh, on that, first of all, you mentioned the minimum being matching. That's what I tell my students. I say, at the very minimum, you want to do matching, because if you don't, you're just throwing away free money. I mean, that is a given. But as I do with my students, I show them, and this is whenever I go out to speak, I will show them, and this is what I consider time value of money also. I'll show them a person that's starting at age 26 and put away, let's just say 10%. And with no matching whatsoever, and for 10 years at age 36, and just stop. And then a person starting at 36, and the difference is just amazing. In class, the final exam I have is an open book, open calculator, and I have the students. I say, here's the scenario. You're age 26, and you put in this. You decide what you want to put in. And then we'll have the employer matching. We'll have the assumption of what rate of return you're going to have. And let's just look at what you will have at age 60. And then the students have the latitude to say, well, what if I started at, one student said, I'm younger, and I started at 24 instead of 26. And I had an extra $1 million just for those 2 years. And I said, bingo, you made an A on the final. It's an eye opener. And, what all through college, and no one really showed me how important it was to invest in your early years, whether your early years are in your 30s or 20s or even 40. It just makes a world of difference. And so I try to show that as kind of a wow factor. And but if you're older, like I do have some students that are older in class, and I say, don't think that it's just too late. You just have to contribute more, reduce your debt, and you'll get there. But I wish someone had showed me that. That's what I call the time value of money. How important it is to invest. The earlier, the better. And it's quite remarkable. And I share during my talks the calculator that you could use for that. So it's I just love it when the light comes on and say, "Oh my goodness!" And I wish my light had come on a little bit sooner. So
I
don't
do
know
too.
why. As Ray Charles once said, a man can only eat so many steaks. But
I love that. Well, let's talk about that. So Denver Nuggets won the NBA Finals last night.
yes,
If
they
I
did.
had put $100,000 on them in the beginning of the year, it was 20-1 for that to happen. Everything would have been taken care of in the 8-month season. all would have been good.
Yes.
But you do talk a little bit about gambling, and in some ways, I feel like managing risk with the house and with the renter's insurance all kind of come together. So tell me a little bit about why you put gambling in there, and then a little bit about risk and how to maybe minimize risk, but also in some ways you actually want to maximize risk when you are younger. So I guess gambling and risk.
Risk is with us. And, when we're younger, risk is involved as far as investing, and you want to be riskier. When I say riskier, I'm talking about the fluctuations of the stock market. And on average, the stock market does increase over 10% a year, and the statistics bear it out. Now, that doesn't mean it doesn't go down 30% one year and down another 25% another year. But overall, it is close to 10%. Now, the reason it's risky is because the fluctuations, like a roller coaster, et cetera. Now, on the other hand, I think unnecessary risk would be something like gambling, and gambling. First of all, they build those nice buildings in Vegas for a reason, and and I'm not to say that I don't. Whenever I do it, is we have a card playing group, and somebody will come in. Hey, Powerball is up to $500 million or whatever, and they said let's all put a couple dollars in. Now I will do it just because. Sure enough, I would be the odd man out, and everybody else would do that. So I do it just for the fun of it. But I would, no pun intended, I would bet I have not done that more than 5 times in my life.
Okay, all right. So a bit staying away from massive risk like that. But tell me a little about housing. We had it kind of a little bit. I think there's an expression, the best time to buy a house is last year. And with interest rates the way that they've skyrocketed, that's certainly true. But I feel like the length of time you have to retain a house now for it to make sense has gone up. And we hear over and over again that you should buy a house, not throw away your money with rent. But man, I tell you what, I own 3 houses, and those renters are real excited to call me about the roof. Or they're real excited to call me that, hey, it seems like the AC's going out, and they're excited they don't have to pay for that. So tell me a little bit about housing and mortgages and renting.
Boy, that is true. And first of all, let me just say that you're too young to remember this. But back in 79 to 1881, mortgage rates were around 18.5%. 17.5, 18.5. So, we're looking at right now, what is the 30-year, about 5 or 6? I don't even know.
It's closer to 8 now.
On a 30-year?
I could be wrong.
Okay,
so I'll double check.
Well, even if it were 8, that's still historically a lot lower than 17.
Yeah, 7.4. That's what it is.
And see, I learned something today. I didn't know it was up to 7.4. So, but here's the thing. I think there's a rule of thumb out there. If you don't think that you'll stay in a house 5 years, have you heard somewhere along that? It's probably not a good deal. And there are worse things than renting. I'll tell you, I'm amazed at how many students are in pharmacy school that have a house, and all I could think of is, boy, we have built 3 houses, and, obviously they were new when we moved in, but there's still things you have to pay for. And there's maintenance issues, even though they're newly built houses that come up. We're always spending money. And I know in the long run, we'll get that money back, but there's just a lot of money issues. And I'd say if you're not going to be there in that location a certain amount of time, then you should rent. There's a lot less pressure. And my daughter, that's in Los Angeles, she is wanting to buy a house so bad. And in the Los Angeles area, boy, you're talking about $1 million as a starter house almost.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right.
It's just it's crazy. And I said, well, let's just wait. Let's just wait and see, where you're going to land and whatnot. So, finding as you'd mentioned before, in an email to me, finding the right house at the right time, and the right mortgage is so important. And, but you know what it's like with having, 3 houses. Is that your primary plus your 2 rentals?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. And I'm seeing 2 markets, because one's in the Phoenix market and the others are in Iowa. And I was very excited as Phoenix just skyrocketed, but then Phoenix took a beating, not as bad as California, but it went down from 350 to 310 pretty quick. So, as you're trying to make, save a couple $1,000s each month, and you just lose 40,000, and then you kind of go back to,
you didn't lose.
I didn't lose it. Yeah. You go back to Buffett. Yeah. I didn't lose any money. I didn't lose it. It's gone up and down, but I didn't lose it. Right. So
I know. And it's the same way with your and I tell my students, I said, you're going to get it to a point with your 401k when the market goes down 30% and you had 500,000 in your 401k. Now you have 350,000 and you're looking for my cell phone or email to get and I'll have to walk you off the ledge. But let me just say that, hey, you don't lose it until you sell. And then if you sell, you're locking in your losses forever. So, at least for stocks, you want to hold out. Now, I don't know particular housing and housing markets, but this housing market is just about any place you go, except for some inner city housing places. You've gotten their money back.
Yeah,
but back to your original point, there's just a lot of expenses and rental dwellings. And I have a former student. He is 36 years old, and he just bought his own pharmacy last year, and he has 40 residential rental units.
Wow.
I know.
Good for him.
Yes, but he has a property management company as well.
Okay, that would be helpful.
That makes a big difference. But he comes in and speaks to my class each semester, and because some people are interested in that, and all power to them. But I'm kind of like you. I don't like it when my toilet goes out, so I can't imagine having to work on those. I'd have to have a property manager or get marriage counseling. Okay. It's like building a house, boy.
You're right.
Your marriage is on the line.
Well, let's talk about the opposite then. Let's talk about giving that money away. You talk about Alfred Nobel in your book.
Yes.
But tell me a story about giving, because I think it's, especially in this time where it's inflation, how am I going to pay the bills? We're putting groceries on the credit card. Congress just decided that we are going to start paying our student loans. And there's 3 years of graduates who've never paid a student loan, who are all of a sudden going to meet that in October or September here.
Right.
But tell me a little bit about the importance of giving, because hoarding it doesn't really provide the satisfaction I think a lot of people do. And you kind of talked about the number of stakes a little bit earlier.
Right. Well, and there's a time and place for it as well. I know that a lot of people consider giving to church or wherever you place of worship, whatever percent, regardless of what stage in your life, and their rewards associated with that, spiritual rewards, etc. And there'll be a time and place for most pharmacists, especially those that follow the tenets that we talked about today. Eventually, trust me, they'll have more money than they can know what to deal with, assuming that they don't follow the buy everything we can, the materialism, etc.
Mm-hmm.
If they stay away from that, they'll have money to give away. And I tell you, quite frankly, it is a selfish method that I'm doing, because I want to be remembered. I've endowed 2 scholarships and given to the Arkansas Pharmacists Association for the building program. And whether it's a name on a plaque or recognition, it just makes me feel good. And it's a win-win. And that's why I finished off the book. I tell you, when it's like someone says, and I don't know if it was Dave Ramsey or who said it, but if you don't know anybody else, just think of what all you can do. And that's the case. The things that you can do out there, whether it's helping family or a church or a place of worship or whatever, it is a good feeling that you're able to help out. And, it does feel good. It really does. And like I said, it's not necessarily one-sided there. It is a win-win.
Okay. Yeah. I think that's a great way to end it. Well, I asked you a bunch of questions. Is there any last point that you may want to make or make sure people know? I'll make sure to put the book in the show notes. But I think we've covered quite a bit.
Well, the only thing I would say, and I know majority of your listeners are either in residency or considering residency or were in residency. Don't put just a economic pencil to it, because you're doing something that you really wanted to do and that was necessary for your career. And I know that you may think that you're behind the curve a little bit on the time value of money and contributing. But there's easy, I say easy. There's a simple path, kind of with the book that we were talking about.
Simple path to wealth. Yeah,
simple path of catching up. And, it happens all the time. I saw something the other day, which is really scary, and not mean to hold you, but I just thought 51% in a recent survey of those making over 100,000 are paycheck to paycheck. And I can tell you, I can look at every one of those and analyze what they own, what they owe, and what they make, and I could figure out why they're in that 51%. So hopefully and fortunately, none of my students or any of your listeners will be in that position. But anyway, I'll leave it at that. And hey, I do appreciate this. Being a part of your listening group.
Well, I appreciate you coming on. I do love your stories, and I'm a very slow reader. That's why I asked about the audiobook, and it's just a lot easier when I've got a lot of drive time taking the kids to what they need to go to listen to it. So maybe one day we'll find somebody.
And wherever Jeff Foxworthy calls me and and he will he'll put a spin or two on it.
Well, I'd love to hear that. He was actually at homecoming when I was there in 1992 at Gator Growl.
Oh,
and that's when he was first making his mark. And well, if your family tree does not branch, all right.
And, the interesting story about him. I think he was he an engineer by training?
I don't remember what he was. I just know he's a really smart guy that makes off as somebody that isn't.
And decided that comedy was his way. I keep acting like my students. Sometimes I act like they're my audience on a cruise ship, and I interact with them for funny stories. So sometimes I think I'm a comedian on a cruise ship. But hey, we got to always dream about something.
They say he worked on mainframes. So son of a gun. So did my dad. That's really cool. I'll have to check that out. All right. Well, Joe Baker, thanks so much for coming on the Pharmacy Residency Podcast.
Appreciate it, Tony. Thank you.
This has been the Pharmacy Residency and Money Podcast, a member of the Pharmacy Podcast Network. You might want to check out our available residency audiobooks at pharmacyresidencypodcast.com/books, or you can get your first book free if you've never been on Audible before. You can work one-on-one with me to get a better residency that will better suit your career, health, and wealth at residency.teachable.com. Feel free to send an invite to Tony PharmD on LinkedIn or email me at tonythepharmacist@gmail.com. Music was by Policy.